Mike, not a very good time going on in Washington, D.C. right now, particularly on the other side of the Capitol. Obviously, you're in the House, and
aren't you glad?
And it is not your role. Yeah. It is not your role to advise and consent with regard to U.S. Supreme Court nominations. But obviously, you're watching this as the rest of us are. What are your thoughts?
Well, obviously, I'm disappointed with the timing of somebody dropping an enormous allegation like this a week before a confirmation vote, a final confirmation vote, particularly given that Senator Feinstein's had this in her possession for over 2 months. It really reeks of politics, and that's just disappointing. But when it's come to the confirmation world for the last 3 decades, this is becoming the norm, unfortunately. The same thing happened with Anita Hill in 91. They waited till the last minute to drop that. But having said that, this lady made a serious allegation, and I want her to be heard. I want them to have it in a public forum, and I want him to have a chance to respond. And according to this lady, from news reports, she says there was another young man in the room when this happened. I want him to be able to testify since he's the only witness to what she says happened. And let us make our decisions, and let the Senate be able to decide, and then let's go ahead and have the vote. We want, I think all Americans want, a full complement of justices to be seated in October when they start their next session. So it's time for us to have a vote and get this over with.
I think across this country, we are very angry or frustrated with what's going on right now. But then part of me says, is it really that surprising what's happening? Are you ever surprised? I mean, does something like this, you think, I think I've seen it all, and then this plays out in the media and you just shake your head?
Well, it didn't surprise me that they came out with an 11th hour charge. What I have been surprised about, was that, and not to demean the charges because any sexual attack is to be taken seriously, but from just what I know from the news reports, this lady is saying this happened in high school, over 35 years ago, but she can't remember what party it was, when the party was, where the party was, and she didn't recall any of this till about 3 years ago when it came out in her therapy session. All that gives me real pause about the credibility of this allegation, and I think it should anybody. Those are that's more upsetting to me than the timing. I expected the Democrats to do something at the 11th hour to try to stop this because they don't have the votes to defeat the confirmation. All they can do is try to delay it with hopes that the election will turn out great for them and that they'll take a majority and then be able to stop it.
I mean, don't we feel, and not to interrupt you, Mike, but don't we feel like that's what this is about? It's not necessarily about a search for the truth, but it's about delaying to the point where they hope they get enough votes in the Senate to deny Kavanaugh his confirmation?
Absolutely. That's what this has all been about. I mean, if Dianne Feinstein and the Democrats were really serious about getting to the truth about whether or not Brett Kavanaugh was a sexual predator, she would have come out in July with this letter, or she would have asked him in the hearings about what she had in her possession, or she would have asked him when he met privately in her office with it. And also, another thing that I try to keep in my mind about this is, historically, from my understanding, sexual predators, if they are sexual predators, have a pattern and practice of doing what they do. It's not a one-off thing that happened in high school when they were 11th grader and drunk. It's something they do over and over and over again. To my knowledge, this is the only incident of sexual impropriety that anybody's alleged about this man in his life. So, that also makes me question the validity of the charge. But I really think this has to do with this delaying. And when you hear all the Senate members, Democrat Senate members who are commenting on this, they're all saying, we need an FBI investigation before she testifies. That's just because they want to delay it. They know it would take several weeks to do a 7th FBI investigation of Brett Kavanaugh, and it's just a delaying tactic. I think that this lady ought to have her day to publicly make her charge. Brett Kavanaugh ought to have his day to say why he believes it's not true, and then this witness that she says was in the room should be asked to tell his side of the story. And I think then the senators should vote.
Final thought on this, and then we'll move on to some other things. Your colleague Bradley Byrne in the House has said that if she doesn't testify at some point next week, that not only should the vote be held, but that Senator Doug Jones should vote to confirm Brett Kavanaugh, considering how many Alabamians want to see that happening. Do you agree?
Absolutely. Everybody has to remember, we are representatives. Our job is to represent our district, our state, in that body in Washington, D.C. It is Doug Jones' job to represent the majority will in Alabama when he casts his vote in Washington. If this lady does not testify and convince the Senate, the Senate Judiciary Committee and the full Senate of the validity of her charge, I don't see how you can look at anybody in Alabama and say he's doing his job by voting against her.